All right, welcome everybody. My name is Chris Richmond. I'm with ICF, and I am accompanied today by my colleagues Les Warner and Andalyn Nesbitt Rodriguez, and we also have a special guest with us, Jeff Hunt, as well. And so today we are going to be talking about Youth Build. We're going to be talking about a new notice that came out. We're going to give you another tour of the resources and some of the newer items that have been uploaded to our HUD Exchange website page. And we also are going to have an open time for questions and answers. So like Sean said, if you want to ask your question verbally, go into the chat and type in and say you'd like to ask a question. But first, we wanted to start talking about Youth Build. And before I hand things over to Jeff, I wanted to give everybody a little context about why we wanted to talk about Youth Build today. So if you recall from the training, or if you didn't have an opportunity to go to the training, but you've been reviewing the resources and looking at the different materials, you know that we have Section 3 workers. And so there are three different types of criteria that someone could qualify as a Section 3 worker. They could be low income, they could be employed by a Section 3 business concern, or they could be a Youth Build participant. So we have our Section 3 workers, and then a Section 3 worker could also be a targeted Section 3 worker. And so remember, the criteria depends on whether you are using public housing financial assistance or housing community development financial assistance. But you'll see at the bottom here, being a Youth Build participant would also qualify that Section 3 worker as a targeted Section 3 worker. And so we thought it'd be really helpful to have Jeff Hunt, who's the Youth Build Director from the Department of Labor, to come in and talk a little more about Youth Build and explain what they do and what some future opportunities might be. So thank you, Jeff. Thanks for coming today, and I will turn things over to you.
Thanks so much, Chris, and excited to talk a little bit about Youth Build with the crew today. So I like to start any chance I get to talk about Youth Build with a little bit of history, because I think it is a unique program amongst government programs. What's kind of important to highlight is that Youth Build started independent of the government, and in fact, it existed for quite a long time as an independent nonprofit before the federal government started to invest in it. Where Youth Build came from was this person, Dorothy Stoneman, kind of noticed two problems in her local community in Harlem in the 70s. She noticed young people who were disconnected from school and work, and she noticed a lack of affordable housing. And so in order to kind of address those two problems, she developed Youth Build. And truthfully, the program is very similar to what it was 45 years ago today. In 1992, that's when the federal government got involved. In fact, initially, HUD was the agency that administered the Youth Build program for about 14 years because obviously of that focus on increasing affordable housing stock. The program was transferred to the Department of Labor in 2006 because there was agreement that at its heart, Youth Build really is a workforce development program with affordable housing as kind of a bonus component of the program. So just to help you understand a little bit about what Youth Build is, the target population, the folks that Youth Build is trying to help, are those who are 16 to 24 years of age. They have left high school before they've graduated, so they don't have their diploma. And then they fall into one of these categories. They might be from a low-income family, they might be in foster care, they might be involved in the justice system, or have a disability, or be the child of an incarcerated parent, or be a migrant youth. Now that describes at least 75% of Youth Build participants. We do allow for an exception. It might be somebody who already has their diploma or who doesn't fall into one of those 6 categories, but they might be deemed basic skills deficient through a test of some kind, or they might be referred to a Youth Build program by their high school, usually a high school guidance counselor. So the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, recognizes Youth Build as a pre-apprenticeship program. And the Youth Build program is split into what we call the 50-40-10 model. At least half of the time that a participant is engaged in Youth Build, they're involved in their education. And so they're trying to get that high school diploma, that equivalency degree, think your GED, things like that, in a kind of non-traditional classroom setting, very project-based, things like that. 40% of their time they're spending doing hands-on construction of affordable housing within their own community. Now, in the last 10 years or so, we've expanded the training component of Youth Build to add other in-demand industries besides construction. That includes things like healthcare, manufacturing, IT, but it's a very long list. There's a lot of different industries that Youth Build programs train youth in. All DOL-funded Youth Build programs must train their young people in construction, and then most of our programs offer some other additional training like healthcare, like manufacturing, et cetera. That remaining 10% is focused on community service or leadership development, and that's a particular strength of Youth Build programs. That's something that most Youth Build programs do very well. Now, the Youth Build grants we're lucky. They happen every year. They've been pretty consistent here for a while now. Each grant is somewhere between $700,000 and $1.5 million. Typically, the annual money available for grants is about $90 million. The types of organizations that can apply for Youth Build funding to run a Youth Build program include nonprofits, school districts, community colleges, workforce development boards, housing agencies, and more. And our period of performance is 40 months, and those 40 months include time for planning, implementation, and we've got at least 2 years of active services where the participants are engaged in their education, their training, et cetera. And then an additional year of follow-up where we ask our grantees to track the participants, report on their outcomes in terms of whether they get jobs or they go pursue post-secondary education, things like that. At any given time, there's about 175 active DOL Youth Build programs. And so I'm going to drop in the chat here a link to a map that you can take a look at. You can filter down to your state. You can type in the keyword Youth Build, and you can see if there are Youth Build programs in your state, in your area, that are actively serving participants. Right now, we've got about 40 states that have Youth Build programs, so chances are you'll find one in your area. Of course, we're the government. We want to know how these grants perform, and so some things that we look at in terms of performance indicators, in terms of outcomes that we want to see from our Youth Build grants is, do those young people end up back in school or in a job after they exit the program? Do they get credentials, things like certifications, industry recognized certificates, things like that? Are they making decent wages? Are they improving their skills? And are they effectively serving employers? That's the kind of outcomes that we're looking for with our grants. Got a few more links here for you to check out more information. Of course, our official DOL.gov website. We've got a community of practice, kind of like HUD Exchange, for those of you that are familiar with that, with all kinds of technical assistance materials for our grantees. We did undertake a comprehensive evaluation of Youth Build a few years ago that has a very interesting report if you want to check that out. And then I've got this email address if you want to send any more questions. I do want to drop one more link in the chat, and that is to a webcast that is available now because the Youth Build grant opportunity is open now. Now, that's good news in that, we have this funding available, and you can check out this webcast to find out more about how you can apply, either in this competition or in future competitions. But it means there are some things I can't discuss because we're in an open competition for the grant right now, and I'll have to refer you to that webcast to answer some questions related to the competition. But I'm happy to answer general questions about Youth Build, anything else that you're interested to know about, and I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Jeff. So I think we're going to do a transfer of control here. Here we go. All right. So I'm looking at our Q&A box, and just to remind folks, you've got two ways to be able, we have a chance to ask some questions directly to Jeff about the Youth Build program. So I encourage you, this is this great opportunity that we've not had in the past. So I'd encourage you to either put questions in the Q&A box, or you could also in the chat let our host know that you'd like to be unmuted and be able to allow you to verbally ask. So I see we've got one question here. Let's see in our Q&A to this. Yeah, so they're asking, is this specifically about Youth Build? So for now, we have a short window here with Jeff that we're going to be talking only about Youth Build, and then just slightly later in our presentation, we'll open this up for all Section 3 questions. But at the moment, we want to focus on Section 3 while we've got Jeff available. Sean, do we have anyone who has indicated in the chat box that they would like to be unmuted?
Yeah, we have a question from Lisa Roger.
Great.
Let me. Okay, Lisa Roger, you have been unmuted.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Good. Okay, thank you. So my question is related to the definition of Section 3 workers as it relates to low-income residents for large public housing authorities. So our housing authority is located in one metro area. There are other metro areas and counties that neighbor us with low-income residents in different metro areas and income limits. Would they be considered Section 3 workers for our housing authority, even though they're not in our immediate metro area?
Okay, so we're mainly trying to deal with specifically with Youth Build.
I'm sorry.
But that's fine. But so you will have to always go back to that definition. And then when we're qualifying based on income eligibility, it's going to be based on the income limits for where the worker actually resides. And so you could be in a situation where you had workers that you needed to pull up a couple of different income charts to determine whether they were going to be income eligible or not. So they wouldn't necessarily need to live in your area to be able to qualify as a worker. So they could be, a worker on that project and be based on income qualify, even though they lived in another area.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Sean, do we have any other folks in the queue?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Les, there's a question that came in asking about Youth Build. What is the best way for contractors to find Youth Build participants for positions with their company?
I'm so glad this question got asked because it reminded me of something I failed to point out in my presentation. I think the best place to look right now for finding Youth Build programs is that link that I dropped in the chat that has the map of current DOL grantees. You do have to filter a bit. You have to go into the keywords section and type Youth Build, and it's probably best if you go in there and you select your state so that you can narrow it even further, because there are, close to 200 active Youth Build programs around the country right now. They're mostly concentrated in cities, but we do have rural programs as well. But I wanted to point out that because of this unique situation where Youth Build, the program, existed before the federal government started funding it about 30 years ago, there are Youth Build programs out there in the country that are not DOL funded programs. Maybe they were at one point, maybe they never were, but there are programs who can use the title Youth Build who do not receive DOL funds. So I say that to mean if you find a youth build program out in the wild, it might be worth one, checking our map to see if that youth build program is on there, because that can confirm that they received DOL funds, or two, having that conversation with that program and just confirming, hey, do you receive Department of Labor funds? Because it's only DOL funded youth build programs that their participants count as Section 3 workers. So that's an important thing to uh, clarify before you start hiring youth build participants thinking that they're definitely Section 3 workers.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And we have sort of, I think, sort of a related question on this is they're asking, where's the best place to be able to advertise for youth build opportunities for a Section 3 project? So I think almost that broader question is, how do we best link up? Is it directly with the youth build organization? Is it advertising? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
I do think that the best place to start is by directly contacting the youth build program in your area. It may make sense for you to use the email address from my PowerPoint to contact us to find out, if we can help facilitate an introduction if you're having trouble reaching a particular youth build program. But I think in general, our youth build programs are eager to find jobs and opportunities for their participants. So I think once you find their contact information online, you probably won't have any trouble getting a hold of them to make these kind of connections.
Just checking, there was a related question, but I think it may have just disappeared. So this person is saying, is there a training covering youth build or will it, is this training covering youth build or will it go over Section 3? Yeah, we're starting out talking specifically about youth build and we're very lucky to have Jeff here with us, but we will then, once this initial portion has been handled, we're going to be moving into the larger topic.
Les, did you ask this question? Are youth build programs required to advertise their programs? There were two questions that were kind of interrelated. I don't remember which one.
Seeing that on the bottom of my list. Jeff, you want to?
Youth build programs are not required to advertise. I mean, a lot of them do end up marketing because they want to recruit and enroll participants. They have enrollment goals in terms of how many young people they need to serve based on their funding. So a lot of their marketing would probably be around, recruitment more than, hey, we are a youth build program and we want you to hire our young people. But again, I think the best place to see if there's a youth build program in your area is that map link that I dropped earlier, and I'm happy to drop it again.
And we have somewhat of a related question. They're asking about if there's a localized database of youth build participants, and then asking, maybe the participant has moved and is local to another project area. But I think, as I recall on this, to qualify under Section 3, they would need to be a current youth build participant as opposed to someone who had, completed their participate in youth build or maybe ceased participation on this. So it sounds like, Jeff, that it's going to be, again, the best route is to connect directly with the local youth build organization to connect with their participants.
That's correct. And they wouldn't have a list of participants for, obvious privacy concerns and things like that. But by connecting with the staff at the youth build programs, they can connect you with the participants.
And I guess I would also assume that depending on how this map of where youth build programs exist, because we recognize that at times we've got workers that are, on our sort of division of territory are crossing those lines. So we might be thinking about connecting not only to the local, but maybe a surrounding youth build program where it may be logical for those workers to be able to access the opportunities under your Section 3 project.
That's right. And, it occurs to me that like in some of our larger cities, your Chicago's, your LA's, things like that, there are many youth build programs. So I would encourage you, those of you that are located in larger cities, to cast a wide net and contact multiple youth build programs, because you may contact one youth build program in the city whose funding is winding down, and it might not make sense in the particular timeline of the grant to connect at that moment. But there may be another youth build organization in your community that's the funding is just starting, or it's there's better times to kind of connect with these youth build programs. So please don't just stop after you've made one contact.
And then there's a question that's sort of related here that Jeff, you may want to talk about. So this is asking, are youth build participants hired by contractors, or might they be hired by local entities directly for construction projects, or maybe even for staffing?
Oh, I mean, all of the above. Yeah, I mean, I think our participants are excited about any opportunity, regardless of kind of the organization type. So, they can fulfill Section 3 requirements for, um, you know, as you say, contractors, local entities, etc.
I don't see any other in our Q&A that
I
are
have one.
specific. Perfect.
Hi, Lester. I have one here, and I apologize if this has been asked and I was answering questions. I don't think so. Are youth build workers trained in HUD's lead safe housing rule?
So that's not required. They may be, at a given program. I mentioned before that, one youth build may have trained their young people in construction and healthcare. Another youth build program may train their young people in construction and IT, for example. And so it varies from program to program, the kind of breadth of the training that a participant may receive. So it's worth, if that's something that's crucial for your line of work, that's worth, asking early in that contact with the youth build program.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I would assume a youth build program might be interested in hearing from projects about the kinds of skills that are particularly needed, and whether there's a way to better align their training program to maybe where those job opportunities are.
Exactly. So, again, going back to that notion of kind of the timing of your contact, if you happen to reach a grantee that's early in their cycle, they may be able to adjust their training or plan future training based on your needs. So, just because they're not currently offering the training that you need doesn't mean that that needs to be the end of that conversation.
Right.
So Jeff,
Chris?
maybe just real briefly again, if there's areas of the country, such as Michigan, where there's not a lot of youth build programs, what do you recommend these different government agencies how do they get started, or who would they reach out to try to have somebody apply for a grant? Any suggestions on that?
Yes. So I dropped a link in the chat earlier to what we call our prospective applicant webcast, and that goes into detail about the funding opportunity that's open now. Deadlines for those applications, the deadline for those applications is February 7th this year. But if that's too tight of a timeline for you now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take a look, because in general, our opportunity stays pretty close to the same from year to year. We tweak it here and there from year to year, and so there will be little differences next time we offer this opportunity, but the big things will stay the same in terms of the materials that we require in our application. So if you think that you or another organization that you work with might be a good fit for applying for a youth build grant, I would definitely encourage you to check out that webcast. And start planning for next year. We're trying to start publishing our opportunities on a more kind of predictable timeline. The last two have been published in November, and so that's what we're aiming for again this year, is for our next opportunity to go live in November. So, just because February 7th is around the corner doesn't mean you should give up on applying or sharing the youth build opportunity with your networks.
And have
Great.
universities been good partners in the past? Has that been
Absolutely, yeah. We see a lot of partnering with community colleges, and as you can imagine, those partnerships vary. Some offer tours, and then some, go much deeper than that and offer dual enrollment for youth build participants and things like that. But I would say many, if not most, of our programs have a post-secondary partner. A lot of times that's a community college, but not exclusively.
Great. And could you drop in the chat those links again? Because the
Sure.
panelists didn't get them, so maybe send to everyone, and then we can send them out again if another question comes in about it.
Okay, I think that probably takes us to the time that we've allotted on that. So I want to thank Jeff. It's been really helpful to have some more information about the Youth Build program and be able to talk with you directly. And again, it sounds like the key here is make those connections, identify where there are local programs, and reach out to them about opportunities for that. All right, thanks, Jeff. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Andelin. Try to, yes, here we go.
Oh. All right, thank you so much. Yeah, so now I'm going to go through just a few more slides here for Section 3 implementation. We want to know your experiences. So as you're implementing, as you're beginning or continuing on your Section 3 journey, if you've been successful with working with unions, apprenticeship programs, maybe your Section 3 plan was really helpful to you and to your recipients and subrecipients. If you have any other ideas to share or even any roadblocks that you encountered, we really want to know that. We are, currently in conversation with HUD about future opportunities, and hopefully those can, your knowledge and your experiences can help with peer-to-peer learning and be shared for your colleagues and other folks to learn from as well and to get ideas. So if you can, please go to the chat box, not the Q&A box where we're asking questions, but down at the bottom, there should be a chat icon. If you click that, you'll open up your chat box. If you can, provide your name, email address, kind of the areas that you had success in. Just needs to be quick, and we will reach out to you to get more information from you. So please share your experience with us. Okay, coming soon, we have some Section 3 videos that are coming soon. The Section 3 final rule basics video is going to be coming soon, and that's for housing and community development funds, just the Section 3 rule basics. We also have a final rule Section 3 basics for public housing funds and Section 3 in action. So please stay tuned. Make sure that you're signed up for the listservs on the HUD Exchange. Those videos will be coming soon. All right, there is a new notice available, and this is really important. This kind of talks about the Section 3 reporting. As you know, for housing community development funds, you're going to continue reporting in IDIS. As we know, SPEARS is no more. So housing community development funds continue reporting into IDIS. The lead Healthy Homes funds continue reporting into HHGMS. And for public housing funds, you will be reporting. You need to go ahead and do the program and collect that data and retain it. The Section 3 portal is not up yet, but will be. So you are expected to continue to collect all the information and retain it at your office, but that Section 3 portal is not here quite yet. And there is a notice that speaks to that can be located here right on the screen here. All right, I want to go through a couple of resources as well. We have the HUD Section 3. There's a lot of good resources in the slide deck. The HUD Section 3 page, and I'm going to go there in a little bit. There's also some notices that you should definitely read. The CPD notices 21-07 for home and HTF, 21-09 for OBGA, Office of Block Grant Assistance, and then for public housing, you have the 2022-10 notice that came out, I think, I think in April. Really great notice, and it included a lot of good information, including some contract clause language that I know a lot of folks were asking for. And then that new notice that I just talked about is also here. On the right side of the slide, you see lots of training and tools, and there are just a plethora of great training opportunities and tools here for you. But I want to share my screen quickly and show you one of the Section 3 page, all right, on the HUD Exchange. I'm not sure if I have the
I
right
can see your
page
screen.
here.
Yep.
Okay, this is the Section 3 final, but I wanted to go back a little bit. Okay, this is the Section 3, oh, I'm not on the, there we go. Section 3 final rule. Let me back up for a moment, and I apologize. What I am trying to get to. Okay, Chris, are you still with me? Okay,
I am. Yep. So we're back
sorry, I
on the
couldn't.
slides.
Okay,
You were showing the training page.
it looked like I lost everybody for a moment there. So,
Oh, we're still here
um,
with you.
all right, very good. Let me just go back. There's a page that I want to start with so that you can see kind of where to begin. This is the Section 3 page on the HUD Exchange. All right, here we go, and I'm going to try to share again. This is,
Yeah, so you can go directly to
here we
it,
go.
or if you're like me and you just have like a bookmark for HUD Exchange, I always search and I type in Section 3 and then I can get directly to this. But you're on it now.
Exactly. You can even type in Section 3 HUD Exchange. Yeah, and it'll bring this page up. And that's why I wanted to start here. So thank you guys so much for your patience. So this is the Section 3 page on the HUD Exchange. Lots of great information. Here's an overview. Here we have some contact information. Here, the middle of the page over here on the right, we have policy guidance. We have these notices. Here's that new notice right here that I just talked about a couple of minutes ago. So lots of things are right here. Um, so I'm going to scroll down a little bit, featured resources and training. We have Section 3 FAQs. Let me just show you this really quickly. This is a curated resource, curated spot where there's lots of resources and lots of FAQs that are being updated, and more FAQs are being added as we put on different trainings. We're making sure that we collect all of these questions that folks, really good questions that folks are asking, that are coming up multiple times, and making sure they're in here. And this is searchable, so you can search for something and hopefully get that answer popped right to you there. So there's our searchable FAQs there on the HUD Exchange. I'm going to scroll back down here. And so next are tools and guidebooks. And here we have the Section 3E guidebook. This is a really great interactive tool that's going to give you a ton of information. You push next and you can scroll over. Here it goes through the background, it goes through regulatory provisions, it goes through Section 3 in action. Kind of goes through contracting and hiring, goes through the benchmarks that you need to, that you're striving to hit, and then program specific application as well. We have here Office of Public and Indian Housing, CPD. Here's lead hazard control in healthy homes. I know someone asked about that a little earlier in the chat. So lots of great information and a great way to find that information here in the e-guidebook. I also want to show you down here with the e-guidebook in the same flip over here, there are tools. Here's a sample Section 3 plan. I think a Section 3 plan is one of the most useful tools you can have with Section 3. It kind of lays out everybody's responsibilities so that everybody is on the same page at the beginning of the project for what needs to happen. Here's a HUD compliance review checklist. If you want to make sure that you're in compliance, then you can start with this review checklist here and work backwards. Make sure that you have everything covered there. We have sample employer certifications, self-certifications, um, even a funding tracker, labor hours tracker. So there's a lot of great tools here at your fingertips here on the HUD Exchange as well. All right, I'm going back to that. I keep going back to this Section 3 HUD Exchange page. Now I'm going to go into training. Here's understanding Section 3, but here's what I really want to show you guys. The Section 3 final rule training. Here's some tools, exercises. It'll take you back to the guidebook, but here's what I want to show you. Down here at the bottom, for anyone who might just want to go back and get some more of that fundamental information, maybe you missed the trainings and couldn't attend. Maybe you attended, but it's been a while and you just want to go back and hear from the beginning again. These are the trainings. There's a 3-day training that covered both housing and community development funds as well as public housing funds. And here they are. There's the recordings, slides, transcripts of those trainings. You can go at your pace and watch them and really dig in there. And then there's also the 2-day trainings that we did just for public housing agencies. It's just focused on those rules for public housing agencies. Here's those recordings again, and slides and transcripts from those as well. Office hours materials are also here, but pretty soon they're going to be pulled up and expanded a little bigger and will be here just like these trainings are as well. Okay, so lots of great information on the Section 3 page on the HUD Exchange, and I just kind of want to take you through all of that. There are lots of great resources. Let's go back to the slide now. And so, yep, I do encourage everybody to go to this resource slide and poke around and see what you want, what you need. There is a lot here for you. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back over to Les for some questions.
Great, thanks, Andolyn. And I wanted to mention, I figured out in the meantime that when Jeff sent his links, they didn't go to the attendees. So I have resent in the chat box. If you look, you'll see that, and these are all ones that Jeff had provided to all of the resources, including there's an email address at the Department of Labor to submit any youth build specific questions on that, and then also the grants map that he referenced as part of that. So those are now in the chat box and they should be appearing for you. All right, so I'm gonna, at the moment, close that out. Looks like I have control there. I'm gonna shut a few things down just to make it easier to manage what's on my screen. So just as a reminder, you have 2 ways to be able, and the rest of our time is going to be used for a question and answer portion of this. So you have 2 ways to be able to submit questions. You can put them in the Q&A, which can be opened by clicking on that icon if it's not already open, and submit those. And we have Andolyn and Chris are working on those, but you also can simply in the chat box say that you would like to verbally ask a question. Sean, do we have folks in line for a verbal question?
We do. We have one from before, Diane Pagan. Diane, you have been unmuted.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if a person, I think that I heard you say that if a young person to be eligible, they have to be not attached to employment nor to higher education. I'm not sure if I heard that right, but in the case that that is the case, what if a young person is in an employment situation that really isn't what he wants, and maybe it isn't really going to lead where he wants to go? Can he leave that employment situation in order to make himself eligible? That's my first question. And then my other question would be, if an organization doesn't necessarily serve exclusively youth, but they want to compete for the youth build funding, and they're able to, would they be able to compete and then use the funding for the portion of their participants that are the right age and do meet the eligibility requirements?
Sorry, I was
Do you
muted.
want to pull up maybe slide 6?
Yeah, I will. Let me move back a slide, and let me type this in. So when Jeff was making his presentation, let's think. Oh, here we go. So in your question about eligibility on this and about employment. So this is for the Youth Build program, this is the criteria for eligibility. And so it doesn't really relate to their current employment as far as I see on this, but has to do with their income status and some of their, these are targeted for folks that have left without having graduated, and then with some additional criteria. And then he talked about that there's a 25% exception rule for that. So your first question seemed to relate specifically to eligibility for participating in Youth Build, and this is the portion of criteria on that. I'm not sure that we can answer your more specific question about eligibility for an organization to be able to compete for the Youth Build funding itself, but I think in the resources that Jeff included that I sent along in the chat, there is further information, including, I believe, on how to apply, and then there's also an email address to be able to directly route those. So I would recommend kind of following up, utilizing that information.
Thank you.
Sean, do we have another person in line?
Yeah, we have Melody Hines asking a question. Melody, you have been unmuted.
Yes, thank you. My name is Melody Hines. I'm the Director of Capital Improvement with Inkster Housing, and I actually sit on the Board of Education for the Wayne Westside Community Schools, which is in like 6 different communities. And I'm really excited about the Section 3 program. And we actually do have a Career Tech Center in our school district, and we have a relationship with the City of Westland. And the kids in our construction program, they actually there's like $90,000 in the pool, and they build these houses and they sell and it goes back into the pool. How can I be able to utilize that particular program with our career tech and our construction students with the Section 3? Would I be able to coordinate that, or would it be different, or how would that work?
Well, so it sounds like the program that you're talking about, which sounds great, isn't a youth build program itself. So it doesn't sound like it would qualify specifically for this sort of automatic categorization, but it also sounds like the folks that are participating in that program line up very well with our qualifications as a Section 3 worker, and in some cases perhaps a targeted Section 3 worker. So we have spent a lot of time in working with Section 3 grantees in training about putting together a Section 3 plan. In other words, they have quantitative benchmarks to try to meet on the percentage of that workforce that qualifies as a Section 3 worker. So they need to be able to make those linkages to identify workers that could qualify. So it would seem for you, if you have not already been in contact with units of local government, also with the local housing authority, who would be receiving funds that would trigger Section 3, that it would be great to simply reach out. I would hope that they would already be reaching out to you, but they might not be aware of your program. I would encourage you to reach out to the unit of local government, ask them for their contact on their Section 3 program, or maybe asking about their HUD funded programs, and talk to that person about Section 3 and how your program might be able to link in and provide, identify potential workers for that are going to qualify for Section 3.
Thank you.
Great. Sean, do we have another question?
Yes, we have Larry Johnson has a question.
Larry?
You have been unmuted.
Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. I work for the Hartford Housing Authority in Connecticut, and so I think we have a good Section 3 program running right now. I think we've implemented the final rule and kind of have that going already. Um, One of the major issues that we're running into now, especially since I just sent out the 2022 audits to all of our vendors, is the more one-off services. So our contracts and those our contract related vendors, they're all kind of on board. So we had about 120 vendors. 40 were contract related. The rest were just like one-off services. Somebody had to go fix a pipe or something like that. How do we enforce? Do you have any ideas to enforce like Section 3 on vendors that are doing one-off services like that?
Well, first off, it sounds like you're already doing, is tracking whether the funds that you're using for these one-off services are actually triggering Section 3 requirements. So if it's coming from your operating, your capital funds, then it would be as part of your Section 3 triggering, and so you're trying to meet those benchmarks. So as far as your requirements on Section 3 and having that participation, you certainly, I would think, based on all of your procurement that you're doing, are trying to identify whether those vendors would qualify as either a Section 3 business concern, or whether their workers are going to qualify, and you can tabulate and count the hours on that. But you don't necessarily have a way to require that, other than you're going to be following your standard procurement policy. And your procurement policy might have allow for you to be able to prioritize that a vendor is responsive to your RFP, RFQ, based on your asking questions about their Section 3 eligibility and how their workforce would be able to help you meet those quantitative items on that. So, I mean, I think the key here is you have to be able to demonstrate that you're making those best efforts on that to be able to meet those quantitative benchmarks for that. And then in the absence of that, or maybe the backup on that, is the qualitative efforts to be able to demonstrate that you are trying to link up and work towards those goals.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just a little because we created a form for that, basically for to basically be attached to the purchase orders that we do, but like 7 out of 10 times the vendor doesn't receive the purchase order before they do the service. Um, so that part was a little tricky on how to enforce it that way.
And for the vendors that you are issuing a purchase order, are they a vendor that you already have under contract, or is it because they're falling under like a small purchase criteria that you essentially don't have something that's occurred earlier to pre-qualify them?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's a small purchase, and
Okay.
yeah, so we use operating funds for like most of services like that. And another problem is once we tried to enforce it a little bit, and there were a few vendors that's like, oh, we're not gonna come because we got to fill out all this paperwork. So it's like,
Yeah, and we've certainly heard that from other folks, that particularly on these smaller uh, purchases, it may be difficult to get the small vendors to be able to be responsive to the Section 3 question. So, I mean, I think you're needing to be able to demonstrate that you have a system in place that you're attempting to make, um, uh, include Section 3 as part of that process and working towards meeting those goals. But, I mean, there is a recognition that if you excluded vendors that didn't respond to that, you could then end up not having the needed vendors that you needed, perhaps, to be able to complete those tasks.
okay.
Okay, thanks. Sean, do we have anyone else in the queue?
Not yet.
Okay. And Andolyn or Chris? Andolyn, there we are.
Absolutely. Thank you. I have a question here that I think would just be better answered verbally. Um, and I apologize, I just had it here a moment ago.
They bounce around on our screen as questions are added, so sometimes lose them and have to find them again.
Okay, we have staff funded by FSS and Ross programs. So this is a public housing authority. For reporting purposes, can these staff members be lumped in with general office staff for the purposes of Section 3 workers, total labor hours, and Section 3 labor hours? Or would FSS and Ross be a separate staff category? So if we have, let's see, if I have the ball, I will change this to our training day 1 slides, and
You have control now.
have control. And I think that it's slide number. Should have had this all already, but when we're talking about public housing and the applicable buckets, slide number 44. Okay, so for public housing financial assistance, you're going to be reporting on a fiscal year basis, so not on a project by project basis like housing and community development. So on a fiscal year basis, these folks work under the FSS and Ross programs. So I'm not sure why you would lump them in with general office staff, but you would be reporting on the FSS and Ross programs. If the general office staff are being paid under operating funds or some of the other funds that are here in the applicable buckets, then you're going to be reporting all of that together anyway, because you're going to be reporting on a fiscal year basis. Right, Les? Anything you would
Yeah,
add
and
there?
I think we're also waiting for some additional guidance in that we don't have the public housing portal that's going to be used for the reporting on this yet. So I also think I interpret part of the question as, how that information is grouped on that reporting. And I think that we won't have probably the full answer to this question until the portal itself is available on that. I think the most recent public housing notice provided some indication on that because there's a sample form to be able to collect data for reporting. And so I think that kind of gives you a structure for how that information could be collected. But until we see the final portal, I don't think we know specifically the answer on how far you will have to break these out versus being able to group it all together on that. Unfortunately, I think that's one of those things yet to be defined.
But do know that if people are paid, even if it's regular public housing office staff, if they're paid out of these applicable funding buckets, then they will be subject to Section 3.
Yes,
All
I
right.
agree.
Do we have time for one more?
Sure. And
okay.
then we'll go back to Michael in just a moment.
Very good. So this is a scenario. Someone was receiving public housing assistance, but they stopped receiving public housing assistance in 2020. The person is hired by the construction contractor in 2021. The construction contractor is hired for a job, PHA funded job in 2022. Is the worker in question considered a targeted Section 3 worker because he was receiving housing assistance in the past 5 years, or would he or she still have to have been receiving the housing assistance when hired?
So, Angela, I think if we go in the same slide decks, because you have control, to slide 32, I think that'll give us what we're looking for here. Yeah. So if we're talking about a targeted Section 3 worker, we always have this sort of the magic easy version of this would be that their employer has been qualified as a Section 3 business concern, and then we would be automatically able to count all of the employees without essentially having to go through a further process on that. But in the absence of that, then we would be talking about whether they currently fit one of these criteria that then is listed below, or fit at the time that they were hired, and our period is looking back 5 years. So if they were hired, let's say that they were hired in 2021, but they, at the time they were hired, had already moved out of public housing, then we would not be able to look back and say, oh, but wait a minute, in 2020 they occupy public housing. It's based on currently today or at the point that they were hired. But if in 2021, when they were hired, they met that criteria, then yeah, we would be able to count them even though they no longer are a resident of public housing or receiving Section 8 housing assistance as part of that. So that look back period at the maximum will go to 5 years. We can't, unfortunately, go back prior to when the new rule was put in place, but it's also limited to looking at that at the time period when they were hired if they don't meet that criteria in at present. Excuse me.
Thank you so much. And I wanted you to go through that because I know that's a little nuance that a lot of folks don't get. So when I saw that up there, I just wanted to, it's either currently they're qualified or when they were hired, on the date that they were hired. So thank you so much.
And I'll just mention that this flexibility is part of this. Under the old rule, we really focused, Section 3 focused on new hires only. And so this expanded version is looking at the overall labor workforce. And so this not only allows you to count workers that would qualify in your existing workforce, but also gives this sort of benefit that if you are hiring eligible workers, that you will continue to be able to count them for up to 5 years going forward on that. So it really does encourage not only hiring these workers, but keeping them as part of your workforce. I guess the other part of this I'll just mention is they don't need to continue to be income eligible. So it's good that they were income eligible when they were hired, and that becomes an essential part of being a Section 3 worker. But with this look back period, we can have a worker that qualified when they were first hired, but now have moved forward and gotten some raises and be doing better, but that employer still gets credit for up to 5 years for adding that worker to their workforce and helping them move forward in their lives. All right, so Sean, we had in the chat, Michael Strom is saying that he has his hand up, but he wasn't sure if he was in the queue. So if we can go to Michael or the next person in line and kind of work our way through that.
Sure. Michael Strom, you are unmuted.
Yes, thank you so much. This was answered in the Q&A, but I just had a further question and clarification about it. So for immediate hires for emergencies, so for instance, let's say that a tree fell down in the middle of a path, or a sewer is blocked up and needs to be cleaned, and there's not someone on staff that can do it, so we need to hire out. Are those positions required to fulfill Section 3 for positions that say are done in one day, or done in just a couple of hours? How would we? What kind of reporting and what kind of due diligence is necessary for those situations?
Well, I think you all are required to be able to demonstrate that you are implementing your triggering funding sources in a way that you're trying to fulfill the Section 3 requirement. So I'm going to presume that you have a process, and it may be really well laid out in your Section 3 plan about those actions that you're going to take to try to make sure that when you have a hiring opportunity, that you're going to be implementing the Section 3 goals. But I think much like we see in probably most HUD policies, that there tends to be sort of a exception clause that when we have an urgent situation, that we may not be able to implement some of those portions. So I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to be reporting that for that triggering funding source, that the overall percentages you're trying to meet the benchmarks on that, or be demonstrating that you have done the qualitative effort. So I think that still is appropriate, that you're going to have some things that just you are not going to be able to do that same level of scrutiny on Section 3 because of the fact that it's something that needs to get done. Now, you might still be able to, you might be contacting and hiring that vendor to do something right away. You still could be following up to see, do they qualify? And if they do, trying to collect that information, but it wouldn't be a blockade on being able to hire them and have them complete the work that needed to be done.
Okay, great. And a follow-up question, as you brought up the overall goals of Section 3. Sorry, let me reword this. Are all kind of procurement small roles considered part of a single pool that needs to fulfill Section 3 requirements, or is each individual job broken down and needs to fulfill those Section 3 requirements?
So your benchmarks for this, and actually, Andolin, I think you still have control. If you want to take us back to the slide that you took us to, which might have been 44. Yeah. So as we understand this, and again, as I was mentioning earlier, there's going to be more clarification as we actually get the public housing reporting portal and kind of are able to look at the details on how that data is going to be broken down. But at least on under the applicability of this, we know which of these funding sources trigger the Section 3 requirements. And so the rule would say that, we're looking for these benchmarks to be applied percentage-wise for that. So we know, like for instance, if we were talking specifically about operating funds, that percentage benchmark on workforce that counted qualified as Section 3 workers, that it's overall for the operating funds and not we're looking for that percentage in each individual job. So it is an overall average and reporting for that funding source. Now, what we sort of additionally have asked is, might it be that if you are a public housing agency and you are triggering under a number of these funding sources, will the reporting for the capital funds be separate and measured in compliance on benchmarks for capital funds versus operating funds, or might they be cumulatively measured for compliance on that? And that's the part that I think we don't necessarily know, but I think we do know that sort of level of evaluation is at the funding level rather than the project or the task level.
Okay, understood. So if, for instance, as we brought up earlier, there's a job that's immediate, needs to be done, but we don't have the time to go through the normal Section 3 process and make sure that's being fulfilled. If another job that's more long term more than fulfills their Section 3 goals, that would cancel out the other issue. Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's a recognition that on, like, let's say we were doing some kind of a capital fund project, we might have some portions of the construction work that, based on the trades that we're working on that site, it might be unlikely that their trades are going to be eligible unless we were able to maybe have, like apprentice level workers on that. But we might have other parts of that scope of work where we have another contractor or business that let's say they are a qualifying Section 3 business concern. And so that might yield a lot towards meeting our percentages. So it is overall and not contract by contract or vendor by vendor, which
Got
is a good thing.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sean, do we have another verbal respondent?
Yes, we have one from Margie Perez.
Okay.
Margie, you
Yes,
have-
I had a quick question. We come across quite a bit of organizations or companies that do not need to hire any more staff, that they have enough staff on hand. So to meet our Section 3 requirements prior, when we had to report in Spears, if they did not need to hire anymore, it was Section 3 compliant because it didn't trigger it. Now we're having trouble having to count those hours. So a recommendation or a question is it possible that we can fund a job training program specifically for targeted Section 3 workers and be compliant with our Section 3 reporting?
So, and
Or requirements.
somewhere we have some language about this, but so first off, so I just want to make sure everyone listening to this is clear on this. So the new Section 3 rule is looking at overall workforce, whereas in the past we were looking at job creation. And
Yes.
so in the past, we're only looking at new hires. So in this case, for our determining on qualifications on this, we're looking at overall workforce, and that includes this potential of looking back to the date they were hired, if it's within our rule time period. And so in some of these cases, you're going to qualify based on, they have some new hiring, but they may have existing workers that are going to qualify. So you're counting based on the criteria that's been laid out in the rule, specifically for Section 3 workers, also for targeted Section 3 workers. So you may have projects where, based on either lack of hiring or the existing workforce, that you're not going to have enough hours worked by qualifying workers to be able to meet those quantitative benchmarks. That's okay, because the second way to be within that safe harbor on this, essentially, is to be able to demonstrate that you have your qualitative outreach. So you're making those efforts on that. So I think in the past, there have been a way for you to fund some of those training opportunities and count that, I think, kind of handing off some funding as a way to be able to count that towards your Section 3 goals. You're not able to do that under the new Section 3 rules, but you could be demonstrating compliance by saying we have appropriate outreach. So we're coordinating with this program, whether you happen to be funding that or not, as part of your qualitative efforts. And there are a long list, or a healthy list of qualitative outreach efforts that you could make. I'm just going to try to see if we can flip back to that particular list. Just
I did see where it said to provide job training programs or
Yeah.
job fairs.
But I think the question that has been identified somewhere here is this sort of, I think there has sort of been in the past a sort of payment in lieu of, which isn't allowable, but being able to show that you are making these outreach efforts, these qualitative efforts, would count towards that.
Yes, we're considering funding a job training program under our CDBG public service cap for targeted Section 3 workers to meet in the
Yeah.
event that we don't meet the thresholds or benchmarks.
I think that's good. I mean, I would think, frankly, that folks are going to want to always have a qualitative effort sort of as a standard, so that you're always implementing your Section 3 plan in trying to meet those quantitative benchmarks, but that you kind of standardly always are also operating, taking some of these actions so that you know at the end of the project whether you meet the benchmarks or not, that you're always going to be meeting compliance based on being able to answer, and Andolin's put up on the screen this list, which is coming out of the regulations themselves. But in the absence of meeting those benchmarks, then your reporting system, whichever system you're reporting in, will be asking you about, okay, so you failed to meet the benchmarks. Have you completed qualitative efforts? And you would be indicating in your reporting that, yes, I have. So that project or you would still be considered to be in compliance if you're able to indicate that.
Thank you.
Okay. Sean, do we have another person in line?
No, that was the last person in my queue.
Okay. And Andolin or Chris, there we go. Hey, Andolin.
Hello. Yeah, I have a couple here. Do service delivery charges get counted towards Section 3 threshold, or is it just project costs? I can't think of a good service delivery charge that would.
Well, so why don't we pop back to slide 44 again, because I'm guessing this might be a public housing question. So assuming that this is a public housing question, the triggers for applicability are based on funding sources and then the programs that are at the bottom. So essentially, anything that's being paid out of, and let's use, for example, operating funds, are going to be part of your compliance requirement, that we're going to look at those total labor hours that are part of this, and then trying to make sure that we are meeting those benchmarks. So on a service delivery charge, I guess the question is, does this represent labor hours? Because what we're tracking here are workers and qualifying hours that are, so I think it goes back, question goes back to, what are you paying for? And if it's labor that you are paying for, then looking at, for those labor hours, the workers that are completing that, and trying to track to have qualifying workers. So I would think there's some things that may not be billed to you or really or represent labor hours, and so they're not going to be part of what you're counting in looking at your compliance for Section 3. And I'm going to suggest, just because I think it would be kind of going further on that question, might make sense with a real life example to maybe work with your HUD rep on this and kind of go through the details with some examples on that. That may give you better detailed information on that.
Andolin, there's an extended question below that. Do you see that?
See the good question.
Yeah, why don't you ask that one? That might make more sense too.
I'm not sure if this is a question or a statement, but good question on activity delivery costs. This person just typed this as you were talking. Soft costs. We have infrastructure projects that have other costs to support the project construction. This would be a total cost of the project, including the construction costs. So we have infrastructure projects that have other costs to support the project construction.
Okay, so I mean, I think the key here is, first we're deciding, so this sounds like an HCD project. And so in this case, we are then looking at, is it one of the projects under HCD that triggers? So we have housing construction, housing rehab, or other public construction, which would include our infrastructure. Then under HCD, we also have this threshold test. And so is it over $200,000? There you go. Thank you. So and I would guess almost every infrastructure project you're doing is going to be over that. So at that point, then we know that this project itself is triggering Section 3. So then what we're looking at for Section 3 compliance are the labor hours on this. And so we would be under let's say we have a contract with a vendor who's going to do the construction work for, I don't know, a sewer line extension project. So as part of our contracting, we would be asking for an estimate on the front end, probably of the total labor hours they're expecting, but we're going to then track over time labor hours on this and then qualifying workers to be able to calculate compliance with that. So there may be other expenses as part of that. For instance, they're going to be materials that are being purchased that the workers are going to be installing. But what we're tracking for compliance here are the labor hours related to this project.
Okay, thank you so much. I have another one. For reporting purposes, and this is a public housing authority. For the public housing authority employees, do we just collect total hours worked and how many are Section 3 hours versus targeted Section 3 hours? It's this person's understanding that Section 8 employee hours do not have to be collected along with licensed professionals like attorneys or CPAs.
Well, so the data that's needed to be able to report on Section 3 compliance are the labor hours, total labor hours for this. So, and that would include people that qualify versus that don't qualify. And then out of all those labor hours that are completed, we need to know which of those workers actually qualify as a Section 3 worker or a targeted Section 3 worker. So let's say we have staff members and we have 5 staff members. We would go through the process and determine, oh, actually 3 of our staff do qualify, let's say as a Section 3 worker. So we need to know the total labor hours worked that are being charged off. Let's use the example again of operating funds. So we've got maybe 1,000 hours that have been charged off towards this funding source in the last year because PHAs are reporting on an annual basis. And then out of that, we're tracking which of those workers qualify. And so if I am an agency worker that qualifies as a Section 3 worker, I'm going to be calculating, okay, how many qualifying hours were worked during the last year. I worked, 300 hours, Andelin worked 200 hours. And so we're going to be reporting those. Here's our total, here's our qualifying hours. And then the system will be calculating what's that percentage, and did we have enough qualifying workers to have met those quantitative outcomes on this? Otherwise, to be in compliance, we're going to need to demonstrate that we made our qualitative efforts to try to do appropriate outreach on this and implement the Section 3 plan goals.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wasn't sure about the Section 8 employee hours not having to be collected.
And I will mention, since this question includes this reference to licensed professions such as attorneys or CPAs, we have this exclusion when we are calculating the total labor hours for professional service hours, which that's slide 58. I magically flipped a page and there it was. Any non-construction services that require an advanced degree of professional licensing, such as the attorney that you're working with, they're going to be excluded. So when we're counting how many labor hours do we have that we need to report on, we don't count their hours because they're considered professional service hours. But let's use in the example of we have our contract with a law firm, but they may have as part of their, and this kind of goes back to how these are being charged off. If we're charging off for individual workers, we might have some workers that probably not your attorney, but we would have some workers that they don't have they aren't required to have an advanced degree. Probably a better example might be maybe an accounting firm that you're working with. And so we could have labor hours that could be reported of qualifying workers. We wouldn't include them in our calculation of what are the total labor hours for that project, but we could take advantage and go ahead and report those hours as sort of a bonus towards meeting our goal if these excluded sort of workforce did include some workers that could qualify. I'm not sure how often we would see that work out in that way, but it is worked into the regulations on that. So there are some hours that don't get included in that calculation of total labor hours for a project, and this professional service labor hours would be part of that. I'll also just throw out here, I would think particularly on construction contracts, we may have, let's say, maybe the ownership or leadership of that construction firm. They may not be paid as a labor rate out of this. They may be paid out of the profits from a project. And so we may have some folks that aren't actually part of the labor hours charged off to this project. So we may have some times on asking some additional questions on this.
Thank you. Right. Do we have anybody in the queue? Because if not,
Yeah, we have Michael Strom again, who needed a clarification on something. Michael, you are unmuted.
Hey, thank you so much. My question actually has to do with this slide. So it's great that it turned to this. So as far as a PHA's internal requirements for meeting Section 3 compliance, am I correct in assuming that if the job title required an advanced degree, it would not be considered a role that needs to be measured for Section 3 compliance?
We've had folks that said, well, you know, let's say the person that I've hired has an advanced degree, and so thinking that they would exclude them. But the way you described it is more accurate, that it's based on what was your criteria who was eligible to be hired. So it's you may be looking at your procurement on something where you are requiring when you hired that they must present that they had an advanced degree or professional licensing, or maybe in for the task that they are doing by, you know, state or local requirement, that to be qualified they would have to be able to present that they had advanced degree or professional licensing on that. But you would perhaps have a vendor that it wasn't part of the requirement on that, but they happened to have an advanced degree of professional licensing. In those cases, we would say, well, it's not really a professional service labor hour that's going to be excluded from that. That probably maybe muddies the water more than needed here, but I think you're exactly right on how you described this.
Great, and a follow-up to that. So for construction contractors, would hours put in by staff members, for instance, dealing with paperwork related to Section 3 compliance or otherwise ECO plans, would those hours be, if that person was not someone with an advanced degree, would those hours be counted towards the numerator?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at all the labor hours that are related to this. So the fact that they're maybe not specifically construction, but they're part of the labor hours as part of our construction contract would be included on that.
Okay, great to know. Thank you.
So Les, somebody was asking a follow-up if licensed electrician is exempt, or plumbers, are those exempt from Section 3 while we're talking about this?
Well, it should be I mean, we would say that these are services that require, but I guess the question would be, let's say I need a repair done on some plumbing in my building. You aren't always necessarily based on local or state requirements. You're not always required to have a licensed plumber make those repairs. And so in those instances, they might not be excluded, but you also might, as part of your procurement on that, said, we're going to procure, we want to have a licensed plumber that we've procured to be able to have on call for anytime we needed repairs done. So it's either to do the work you're required to have an advanced degree of professional licensing, or you as part of your procurement called that out and specified that that was going to be a requirement that you put in place.
Great. We got a complicated question, Les, about a CDBG-DR buyout question, and I'm just wondering if we could go to the slide that talks about what a project is, because I think that might be how you might have to explain it. It's at the beginning of the training. I was trying to find the slide. Andolin, I don't know if you know which slide it is where it gives the definition.
While we're looking for that, Chris, how do they describe what the actual activity is that they're doing with the CDBG-DR funding?
So they're buying the home in the floodplain, they're demolishing, so we have demolition, and then they're transferring the land to the local government. So it's acquisition and demolition.
Okay. So I think the key here is if these are HCD funds. So first we have to think about, does it trigger Section 3? And so we've said it's housing construction or housing rehab, which it doesn't sound like it fits in that criteria because we're demoing it. We're not.
Well, demolition is included as part of Section 3.
But is this a housing project at this point? I think is the question on this. So I think this is probably messy enough that I'm going to recommend that you go work with your HUD representative and kind of run that up the flagpole, because I think there may be a question about, does this fit into one of these triggering categories? The other part of this would be, when we think about the HCD criteria on this, is that we have a threshold of, does it exceed $200,000? And that's on a project basis, which I think is why you're suggesting this slide. And so we're looking at sites together, and they have common ownership, management, and financing. So if I was doing a buyout program and I have property owners that are applying to participate in that, if these are individual properties, so we have an individual owner on these, we don't have an owner coming to us saying, I have 5 properties, then these would be looked at on an individual basis. So we'd have to apply that $200,000 threshold to trigger the Section 3 requirements based on that. So first, I think there's a question about, is this fitting into one of these triggering types of activities that needs to be solved? And then, based on your program design and what those numbers are, it could be that these are under that 200 or at or under $200,000 level on that.
Yeah, and I just looked in the FAQs, which is why we had Andolin show you the different resources, because there is a question in the FAQs about demolition, and it says demolition projects funded with housing and community development funds that meet the threshold that you mentioned, Les, would apply either as a standalone Section 3 project or Section 3 project that's part of a housing rehab, housing construction, or other public construction project.
Okay. So we're at the top of the hour. I just wanted to mention You know, we went through a lot of resources here. I encourage you to take a further look at that. Angela mentioned that the frequently asked questions, the FAQs, continue to be added to. So use those as a resource. So I wanted to mention that ICF is continuing to work with HUD on sort of determining next steps. So, you know, additional resources, additional guidance that might be provided, or things like office hours or things. So I recommend that you check the HUD landing page for the Section 3 program for information about new offerings that are being provided. With that, thank all of our great folks, Andolin and Chris. I don't know if Jeff is still online, but thank you, Jeff, for helping us on Youth Build. And thanks everybody for participating in today's section.